All right. And we will let the people trickle in. Welcome, welcome. I hope everybody is having a good day so far. We're going to have a great webinar today. Daniel's going to give us all the straight dope on restrooms. So we're sort of going to give people a chance to trickle in and filter in. And I just wanted to say hello and welcome and good to see you, or see your name anyway. How's the weather down there in Arizona, Daniel? Is it boiling hot yet?
Yes, right now it's 106.
Oh, yuck. Well,
but my kids did an awesome job in giving me a Father's Day gift. Saturday it's going to be 93.
Oh, nice. Cool. It's 71 here right now, which is just about perfect as far as I'm concerned. When I left for the SCIP conference, which I just came back to, I left on Saturday morning. It was 54 and pouring rain here in Idaho. When I got down to Dallas, it was 103 degrees. So there's something deeply wrong with that. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Come on in. Daniel and I are just gonna chat here for a minute and say hello. So welcome on board. We'll give it till about 5 after. And this is all ADA. It's all AIA certified credit hours, that kind of stuff. So it's be all good. And I am a sissy, Cindy, but you were there and you know how hot it was in Dallas this last weekend. So don't give me that.
I should warn this. This is a fire hose presentation, so there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and do my best to hit the 55-minute mark.
Perfect. Well, we will give it just a few more minutes and let people trickle in.
If I open the chat window, it doesn't cover the screen, or y'all can't see it?
No, but I can do. Okay. I will keep, if you would like, so you can just focus on your presentation. I will keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A, and if there are any questions, do you want to save them to the end, or do you want me to introduce them as we go?
No, because there's so many graphics. A lot of times if the questions pop up, it's pretty relevant to that time, so it's okay to interrupt, and I'll try and keep the answer short, but let me get something to write on, because I do seem like I always get a question or two.
Excellent. So that being said, if you have questions as Daniel goes through the material, pop them in the chat or in the Q&A if you prefer, and we will get them to answer. And Daniel's really good about getting back to us if he doesn't know the answer off the top of his head. But all right. Well, it is 4 minutes after, so I'll start the. Hello, welcome to the June meeting, and this is going to be our last meeting until the fall, and then we will be back with some more really exciting stuff. Keep your eye on your email to see what's coming up. I've just come back from a conference with a whole bunch of ideas myself, so I hope we're going to have a great fall coming up. Meanwhile, Daniel's going to talk to us about something that we all end up running into and butting heads with, which is accessible restrooms. And the subtitle is, why doesn't the ADA just give me the final answer, final solution? Which I know I've certainly asked that question. Why does it have to be so complicated? Well, Daniel's going to explain it all to us. So Daniel, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Kathy said, I'm Daniel Hargreaves, registered architect in Arizona, and just a whole slew of alphabet soup. But Texas also has a registered accessibility specialist. And that is part of my background. I started doing accessible plan reviews and site inspections in the early 2000s and still continue to try to stay up to date with it. And this one little piece, the restroom, typically the smallest room in your commercial building or even in your residence, seems to have the biggest impact with accessibility. So with that, this is registered with the AIA. So at the end of this presentation, you'll receive a survey. If you fill it out, we will make sure we get those credits to the AIA. If you need a certificate, just leave that in the comments of the survey at the end of the presentation. This material is copyrighted, but if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, I do export it in PDF and gladly share it. So the main learning objectives, and most of this is focused on ADA ever since I've moved from Texas to Arizona. That's the primary, it's not a code, and we'll touch on that, but it's the primary standard that we use here in Arizona. And then we'll also touch on those standards, the difference between code and the standard, the do's and don'ts, some of the misconceptions, and all these different pieces and parts, putting them together to have that accessible restroom. So let's briefly talk about the codes for a minute. ADA, American Disability Act, is actually US civil law. It's not a code, there's no enforcement agency, there isn't an ADA police. So with that, your compliance is warranted whether or not you're, have a pending lawsuit. So that's the approach that takes. However, if your jurisdiction is under International Building Code, under Chapter 11, they have a simple reference to accessibility, and then it ties back to the ANSI 11.7.1. And depending on which code, starting in the 2021, or I'm sorry, the 2021 code, it actually references the 2017 ANSI standard. Prior to that, it was the 2009. The nice thing is the 2009 and the ADA were near identical in setup, language, references, so forth. And then you'll also get into different states and individual areas, such as California, that has their Title 24 section for accessibility. Texas has an entire law called the Texas Accessibility Standards.
Yeah, California used to have some differences from ADA, and they actually had to pass a midterm code update to bring the California accessibility requirements into alignment with the ADA, because there were places where you could meet California, but then you would be out of ADA, or you would meet ADA, but then you wouldn't meet California. It was a real problem.
And that's true in any of these. One exception is Texas, unless your local jurisdiction actually, in the big picture, Texas has their own accessibility police. That's what the RASs do. They do plan reviews, they do field inspections, they send the paperwork to the state. So Texas is moving towards, trying to get as close to 100% compliance on ADA, but technically their own standard, and it's actually approved by the US Department of Justice as being equivalent to the ADA. So in Texas, it's actually difficult to sue under the US civil law because of the Texas has that equality factor. And then you may have local jurisdictions that may have rules here and there. And I always recommend people, don't just say, well, it says in the ADA do this, but keep the relevance of your local jurisdiction. A very brief history on the ADA. It actually goes back, and even prior to 1986, it goes back to the 60s when some of the federal regulations began. But in the big picture of what we call ADA was signed into law by President Bush, July 26, 1990. Bush Sr., which I think most of you probably just figured that out. In 1992, the ADA standards, or also the ADA accessibility guidelines, went into effect. And realizing that there was conflicts and inconsistencies on that first draft, they worked on it over the next 10 years and then presented for public review a draft revision, which was near identical to the ANSI 11.7.1. And in 2010, it was finalized, and then the DOJ signed it into law March 2012. And that's the current standard. So all newly constructed facilities must comply with the ADA standard. And that standard is the one from 2010. The grandfathering has been removed. There's a lot of things that in the original that have been removed, and compliance is now required. The breakdown of the ADA standards is 10 chapters, and we're going to be focusing on 3 of those for the restroom. Chapter 2 is scoping, Chapter 3 is the building blocks, and then some of the specifics is Chapter 6, plumbing elements and facilities. And as we kind of step through these, they all intertwine with each other, but as we start breaking through it, we talk about the main pieces of the restroom. Scoping is where you're trying to figure out, do I have to be compliant? Or what are the overall pieces that I need to be in compliance with? And that's what the scoping chapter is for. So you need to determine, is it a new or an existing facility? Because there are slightly different requirements if it is existing. And then the main piece is toilets and facilities in your scoping section 213. And then the other pieces of that restroom, your reach range, your clear floor space, your door swings, your water closets, grab bars, etc. All these pieces are going to be scattered in different areas. And a lot of this we do find in Chapter 6, but you don't find everything, because what's common is the essence, the reach range. And we'll start talking about some of these pieces. So first, let's figure out what our situation is in our scoping. And I've always just loved this. You know, the first, when the 5 foot by 5 foot stalls were popping up, and, you know, prior to that in the 80s and even the early 90s, you know, you had 30 inches by 4 feet, and that was big enough to take care of your restroom activities. And so the first time you stepped in an ADA stall, it's like, let's hold a party. So under the scoping in 213, the simplest way to think about ADA and when you're scoping your project out is, when provided or where provided, it must comply. It's not one of those that, well, it doesn't really say specifically, as soon as you provide a restroom, now this restroom has to comply. And there are exceptions, just like everything. Even in scoping, you do have exceptions. Alterations were technically infeasible. If you have a building 2,000 square feet and you have one small restroom, and the only way to change it in your remodel or addition is to grow it, and you actually lose other functional space, then that's technically infeasible, or you have structure in the way. But every exception, there's a but. In this one, you still have to find a way to provide a unisex restroom, where the code may say you have to have, one male, one female restroom. Both of those restrooms don't have to be in complete compliance, but you have to provide one alternative, the unisex. Historical buildings actually are exempt, but same thing, you need to provide that unisex restroom. And you need to figure out how to carve out your space, but you also can't undercut. If your code still requires you to have 2 restrooms, you can't just make, turn the 2 into 1. Now you're not in compliance with the overall code. What I always recommend in those situations, look at both restrooms, make both of them unisex, and see if one of them can then get into compliance. Because your total restroom count per gender, you can accomplish that count by making them all unisex. So there are ways to meet both the plumbing requirements and the accessible requirements. Surprisingly, portable toilets are an exception. Think of the big concert event where they line them all up the porta-johns. However, 5% need to be accessible, and they do make accessible portable toilets. Cluster toilets, or a cluster of single rooms of toilets. So your code says you need 10 toilet rooms, so all 10 don't have to be accessible, only 50% of those. And then finally, the exception, private offices, but it has to be adaptable. So what that means is your clear floor spaces have to be ready. Your mounting of grab bars have to be easily added. Your clearances for, or the location of the sink and the toilet have to meet those clearances. So it comes down to how many. At least one toilet compartment, that's when you have a bank of them. And we're going to be focusing more on just a single restroom, not a bank of restrooms. Your water closet, your urinal, your lavatory, your mirror, your bathing facility, coat hooks, and shelves. Each one of these, at least one, has to be accessible. So if you have 3 lavatories in a gang restroom, only one of the labs technically has to be accessible, not all 3. A lot of designs and so forth, it's easier to make the entire bank all accessible and call it done. And then once again, in a banked restroom, if you have 6 or more, okay, so one of the 6 is accessible, the 5 foot by 5 foot, but then another one will also have to be an alternative stall. And we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about toilet stalls. No questions yet? So let's talk about that reach range for a second. So this is where the operational part of the device, so in these 2 photos here, surprisingly, both of these are non-compliance. Those are 1 foot tiles. Your reach range is 4 feet, and you can see that paper dispenser is above that 4 foot mark. That hook, while it was, the person didn't want to put it in the thin part of the door, that's almost inaccessible for anyone that's 5 foot or shorter. So even something as simple as a hook, while you can get to whatever's hanging up there, you can't reach the hook itself. So in the big picture, what is the reach range? This is in section 308, the building blocks. Anything from 15 inches off the floor to 48 inches above is within the reach range. And you're going to see I've done a little minor update. Of course, I mistyped it there, but the 11.7.1 2017, there's no change to this reach range, and that's forward or side. There used to be in the previous one, and you'll still come across this. The best example is typically a thermostat is set at 54 or even 60 inches, which is outside of all reach ranges. What happens is, while a thermostat is something where you're wanting to read the device, if you set it at 60 inches, which is a nice height to see what the temperature of the room is and what to adjust the temperature, in a wheelchair, you can see front approach or side approach. You can't reach it when you mount them that high. And this comes back to anything operable parts has to be within this range. There is no difference. And then on the side approach, there's now a 10-inch max. So you can actually have something project out to the wall 10 inches away and you're still in compliance with your reach range. There is an exception to the gas pumps, and part of this is obviously the safety of the vehicle, setting it up on the curb. As you know, most of your gas pumps are raised, 6 inches above the driving surface and so forth. So that also comes back to, the safety of the device, which has been recognized by the ADA and even the ANSI guidelines that gas pumps still have that exception. And most of and not to be pregnant, but most people that pump the gas are actually standing when they do that. So there are exceptions to those rules at most of the pieces they can get to and then operate the gas pump. Let's get back to the building parts of the restroom. Clear floor space. This one under the new, and I see I have typed all those backwards, yay. So your traditional clear floor space, think of it as the person in the wheelchair, and the space that they're going to occupy is 30 inches by 48. Across the board, that's what you would use. Objects that stick out from the wall, if it's above 27 inches, it can't project out more than 4 inches. So that impedes on your clear floor space. Here's the first change of the 11.7.1. The ANSI is that 48 inches is now going to 52. Now, if I was real savvy, I would have had a good poll question. Why the bigger, it's longer, not wider, because that was, I think, some of the discussions. It's like, oh, bariatrics. No, that's not what they're addressing. It's actually the mobility scooters. They're finding that the typical size of the scooter sits in that parking space of 52 inches, not the 48 of the traditional wheelchair. And that goes the same with the turnaround circle under the ANSI is now 67 inches. But we're going to be, as I said, focusing on putting together an ADA restroom. And there's even adjustments to the 60 by 60 under the ANSI. They now have beveled corners, so you can't have straight T intersections anymore. But that's, as I said, a whole nother presentation. But these are some things to keep in mind, that your clear floor spaces are increasing under your building code. So let's talk about the door swings. This, I always love these two photos. The one on the left was actually that stall there, right there in front of the door is the accessible stall, but you can see at 1 foot tiles, that's only 30 inches away. And so as soon as you come in to use the restroom, you can't get out of the space. Here, you drive up, they give you a nice wide accessible parking space, and then what? And under one of the things to remember about the graphics in the ADA, they are supportive, but are not part of the actual guide or standard. They're not, there used to be a lot, I wouldn't say a lot of inconsistencies, but there were several inconsistencies between a graphic or the verbal language. The verbal language now takes precedence. And in the case of the door swings, you can see when you're perpendicular to the door, whether it's a push or pull, they're telling you how much you need to the side, how much you need behind the door. One of the things that's changed in ANSI is the minimum perpendicular distance now actually is 52 inches. So the 40, which makes sense because your clear floor space is 30 by 52. So having that item be there from the front on the push side, 48 inches, you're in non-compliance under the new ANSI. we're going to focus on four of the door configurations. These are the more typical. You have the push side and the pull side. And what that's referring to in the graphics is whether you're pushing a door open or pulling it open. Think of it this way. Why the extra room as an example, you can see the one with the red square around it. Why do I have 12 inches to the side, but then I also have a push door that is straight on? This is in addition based on the hardware. And keep in mind that some of these say with both closure and latch, whether you need the extra space. Some are maybe just a closure, some are maybe just a latch. And the reason behind that is, and typically it's the closure. So as you're trying to push that door open, the closure is trying to close it, and then it keeps relatching. So the extra maneuvering room lets the person in the wheelchair, or for that matter, if you have mobility challenges and you're on crutches or moving slower, that time delay between adjusting to your position to get a piece of your chair, crutch, body, arm, etc., to hold that door open to finish your maneuvering and get through the door. And then the water closet itself, and the best design, you meet all your compliances there with the height of the toilet paper, the length of the grab bar, but your miscommunication is you're completely outside of the reach range. Or, you know, the best way to get an in-swinging door to work with your toilet is just cut the door around the toilet itself. So now that we've moved into the plumbing sections, the water closet, this is not inside of a stall. We need to keep that in mind. These distances are slightly different once you have a stall all around you. This is strictly for maneuvering around the water closet. Distance from the wall, you'll have 16 to 18 inches. It's now arranged under the old code. It was a static 18 inches, and this was probably the most typical failure, especially a slab on grade project, is because that toilet, you know, that's a pretty tight exact to hit. You almost have to build your wall to work with the toilet after the toilet plumbing has been set. So now they give you a range. My recommendation, whenever you see a range, is pick the number right in the middle, not the 16, not the 18. While there's a range, and if you tell it in your design 18 inches, and the contractor, you know, does their early work at supposedly 18, but it ends up at say 19, you're now in non-compliance for the center line of that toilet. The clear space around the toilet on the parallel to the back wall, or the wall that the toilet is on, 60 inches. Perpendicular out to it is 56. And then the height of the seat is 17 to 19 inches. And I can't think of the last time that I've seen a spring on a seat. Manufacturers, I don't even believe are making those, but you know, those are remnants from, you know, pre-1990 as one way to keep that toilet seat up and to help keep a little bit more sanitized. But now the problem is, if you're in a wheelchair and you're trying to swing over onto the seat, and the seat keeps popping up before you can make the maneuver, that's why no springs is now a requirement. The grab bars themselves, that's in section 609, which is part of the plumbing and not the general building blocks. And another common mistake is the flush valve. If you look here, your flush valve is always on the wide side, so it should be opposite of the wall. This is a real common mistake. If you have back-to-back toilets and the plumber will just order two left-handed flush valves, one will be correct and one will be in non-compliance. And you can see here the grab bar distances. This is a minor change, but The side one's easy, pretty simple to figure out. The furthest the grab bar can start from the corner of the wall is 12 inches. The minimum length is 42, and then that other minimum is 54. So you can see 12 plus 42 equals 54. But what if I have a 48-inch grab bar? You're in compliance. Your grab bar actually is longer. It can either get closer to the corner or go further away from the toilet itself, as long as you meet the other minimums, or the max for that matter, the 12. The back wall is a little different because our toilet has a range between the 16 and 18 inches. Instead of aligning the grab bar from the corner of the wall, so if you had your toilet at 17 inches with a 36-inch minimum grab bar, you would be 5 inches, not 6 inches from the wall, which used to be the old standard. So now it's based on your center line, 12 inches closer to the wall, 24 away from the corner of the wall on the wide side. You can see even with this tank type, they did illustrate it correctly with a flush valve on the wide side of the toilet.
Daniel, is there ever an instance where you can have too much grab bar? You said a 48-inch grab bar is okay, but is there ever an instance when you can just go too crazy with your grab bars?
There's nothing that says you can't have more, unless you're actually, if the grab bar were extending and impeding access to another device within the space. That would be one instance of, if you had a 5-foot long grab bar, 60 inches, and on that 60-inch end, you no longer can find a reasonable place to measure it or mount, another device in the room.
Okay, thank you.
One thing in the ANSI, which is not in the ADA, is there is a requirement for an 18-inch vertical grab bar. And the location of it, I had a slide that I used to show, and I don't know why this one I took it off, but maybe it's on the next one. Nope. I'll get those numbers. I always have a cheat sheet at my desk. I want to say 3131, but I know that's not correct. But it basically places it about where this N is, and it's about 4 or 5 inches above this grab bar here, and runs in the vertical distance. And that's a requirement of ANSI, and it's even in the current one. The benefit of that vertical grab bar, that's actually for the elderly, or if you're having other mobility challenges, you can grab that vertical bar and then help get yourself up where your knees aren't as strong or something like that. That's the intent of that vertical grab bar. It doesn't serve much of a purpose if you're wheelchair bound. We're not going to be placing any urinals within our little test case coming up, but I just wanted to touch base on these real quick. There's the depth of the urinal, that's from the back of the wall to the lip out of the front, is a minimum 13.5, and I think all manufacturers now make them at 14 inches. But the other one, so when you're actually below that minimum height, so you go all the way to the floor, keep in mind that if you have a full height urinal, you still have to have that extend out the full 17 inches. You're not waived from that. And then once again, the height of the lip is a maximum of 17 inches. And then you need that clear floor space in front of it, 30 by 48, which that goes back to the building block in section 305. Now under the ANSI, it's now 30 by 52. We'll just touch briefly on the toilet compartments. This is for when you need a friend to help you. No, I'm not sure. It's just one of those photos that always caught my eye. I think they took down the partition in the middle and said our partition is now in compliance at 59 inches by 60 inches. Well, that space, you can only, so, you know, one element in there. There used to be an older standard where in a compartment stall, you could have a lab in there also, but they found that that does impede in maneuverability within the stalls, and those aren't permissible under the new one. One of the changes here is you can see the depth is at 56 inches, 59 inches, depending whether it's wall hung or floor mounted. But under the ANSI, that now is a minimum of 60 period. So they, once again, they're counting for the scooters entering those stalls to give them the maneuverability they need. The doors into the stall still have some compliancy with your door handing and everything, your approaches, your clearances. The simplest way to think about it is from the face of your stall to the face of your wall, you need those 42 inches. The furthest the door could be from the corner is 4 inches max. And the reasoning behind that is if you put it, say, right in front of the toilet stall, there's no way to dismount back onto your wheelchair and then get the door open. So that 4-inch max puts that latch either just within the range to where they can wheel out back. And always remember where your water closet is and where the door is, they're in opposite corners. That's kind of a good way to think about it. Now, it doesn't have to be on the parallel, as you can see. In your alternative, it can be on the adjacent stall wall in the perpendicular to the water closet. Lavatories, while you can have the best design there is, once you actually start, there are so many items in non-compliance here: the height of the mirror, the rim of the sink, the cleared knee space under it. I mean, it looks gorgeous, but when you start adding each of the pieces together, there's a lot of non-compliance right there. So this goes back to your lavatories are noted in 606, and they have a top height of 34 inches. The rest of the lavatory is driven by the requirements of your clear floor space and your clear knee space and so forth. So you have to go back to section 305 and 306 to find all those requirements. And you have, besides just the clear floor space of your 30 inches wide, your overhang of the sink onto the space 17 to 25 inches, your toe space, and you can see as they have broken down each of the pieces, the bottom of the lab at 27 inches, the top of it at 34. And remember that 34 inches is not to the counter height, but to the top of the sink. So if you have a drop-in sink, that's another, half-inch higher, and you set your counter at 34 and drop in a sink, you're actually out of compliance because that 34 inches is a max dimension. And then, of course, no restrooms complete without your accessories. And almost every project in every facilities with these giant double rolls, I would always find these in non-compliance. Here, they did a really good job in trying to get as many items, working with an automatic paper towel. You can actually get them out of the reach range, because remember that 48 inches, and you can see here, these are actually set at 60. That's the 48-inch mark there. As long as I wave my hand at 48 and the paper towel comes out and I can reach it, you're in compliance again. But as you start peeking around, you'll see now I have uninsulated drain pipes. So that puts this back into non-compliance. So let's talk about the main items that you're looking at, your soap dispenser, your paper towels, your waste receptacles, those are all need to be within that reach range of 15 to 48 inches. Keep in mind, you're wanting to keep these items practical. And there are some exceptions where soap, if you're over the sink, I think it was in the previous one, the height of the dispenser is no longer 48, but 44. Mirrors, it's the reflective surface. So if you mount, in the cases has this oversized frame on it, if you mount the bottom of that frame at 40 inches, and then you've got a 4-inch frame above it, your reflective surface is actually at 44 and you're in non-compliance. Toilet paper, because there are so many relative things, that actually falls back within section 604 and 609. And you can see here in this little graphic, there's a distance from the lip of the toilet, and then the rest of it falls within the reach range. But you can see you always have that grab bar intersecting, and so you have to work with the space around the grab bar. From the bottom of the grab bar, your toilet paper dispenser can't be any closer than 1.5 inches, and then above it, it can't be any greater than 12 inches. So when you're mounting above a grab bar for any accessory, double check, because if you have a grab bar, while you may be in compliance in the height, and then you have to mount that accessory above the 12 inches, you could be outside of your 48-inch requirement. So let's put those pieces together, and let's try and head to the left, not the right, and have a successful restroom. So the first thing you want to do is, in the corner of your room, since that's your driving factor, is those 2 grab bars is with your water closet placed and 17 inches over. As we talked about, if we work with the middle number of that range, that sets your water closet at 17 inches. Then you set your grab bar from the center of that water closet, 12 inches in the case of this one, to the right side, 24 inches to the left side. 12 inches off the back of the wall, 42, the length of the grab bar at 42. And then the clear floor space, the wall of the toilet, 60 inches, and then perpendicular out 56. And then don't forget, if you have a requirement to be in compliance with ANSI, place your 18-inch vertical grab bar. So the next element now to figure out the width is I can actually have clear floor spaces overlap each other. If you remember at a lavatory, I had a 30-inch by 48-inch, and I had a range between 17 and 25 inches for the overhang. So I can actually place the lab on less than, if it's a wall hung, on less than my total depth. So I placed the lab next to the 60 inches, and then 15 more inches from there for the lab. And this is where you're getting down to nitty-gritty inches, but there's your minimum dimension. I placed the lab on the edge of the water closet clear floor space, 15 inches over from its center, sets that back wall length at 86 inches. Now, if you have a little wider lab, you may need to adjust that. Keep in mind also that 15 inches, that's a general rule of thumb, not a requirement. There is nowhere in the ADA or the ANSI. I believe in California Title 24, there is a specific that it does have to be centered on the clear floor space, but the other codes and ADA and so forth, it can be anywhere within that 30 inches. So that 15 inches is not a minimum, it's just a good rule of thumb. So now we go the opposite way. In the case on the pull side of the door, back to our door section, we needed 60 inches. So if from the base of my lab, and I measured 60 inches out from there, if I measure 60 inches from the face of my lab, that puts that restroom at approximately 84. Then once again, if you have a deeper lab, you'll need a little bit more space. And I base these on typical sizes. On the pull side of the door, I also have 18 inches on the pull side, and you can see we now have 3 clear floor spaces, the one for the door, the one for the water closet, and the one for the lavatory. They're all overlapping. A common question that we would get, you'll see the door is swinging into the clear floor space of both the lab and the water closet. In a single-use restroom, as long as beyond the swing of the door, you have the minimum required clear floor space, that 30 by 48, or now under ANSI 30 by 52, because the door is a temporary object. You have the clearances to get your wheelchair or yourself out of the way and then get the door closed. So the door is allowed to swing over those clear floor spaces under current interpretations. And then the final piece, putting it all together in the plan and the elevations here. So you want to make sure you have that 60-inch circle. We have our 84-inch by 86-inch restroom. We have all our accessories. And if we look at the elevations here, the toilet seat cover tucked in the middle, as long as the operable piece of pulling the toilet seat cover out is within the range and straight onto it, I can get the wheelchair. I have my 30-inch clearance. I can mount it above the grab bar because I'm not projecting out beyond that 4 inches. So I'm allowed to place that. I always recommend toilet seat covers, always do the flush mount to get your best compliance there. Your soap dispenser, now in this case, I'm showing it at 44 inches. Technically, it is clear of the sink, and you could mount it at 48, but remember, the use and operation, you're reaching over the sink, so best practice is to mount that soap dispenser at 44. The top edge of the lab at 34 inches, that goes back to the section 608. The reflective surface of the framed mirror is at 40 inches. And then in the case of this water closet example, I have an 18-inch high toilet seat, so I'm in compliance there. And then I've set my grab bar at 33 inches. I set my, and then from the front edge, I'm right between the range for, and this is a double roll toilet paper, and I'll get this question, is do both rolls have to be in compliance? And if you actually measure them, that's next to impossible. So you just have to pick which roll you want in compliance. Sometimes best practice is to mount it in the middle, but in this case, I picked one of them, 8 inches, 2 inches below the grab bar, sets it at the correct height.
Daniel, do you have a question?
Yes.
The 84 inches that you've got as, well, in this case, the vertical dimension of the room, is that an inside room dimension? Because you're showing it inside on one side and outside on the other. So
yeah, good question. Yeah, and if we go back and look, that 84 is inside. It's a bad drawing. But yes, 84 inches is an inside clear dimension. Technically, if you subtracted 5 inches from this graphic, it would be 79. But I think when I drew this, I manually typed in my numbers. That's why I just review and I don't draw.
Unfortunately, it's too easy to cheat when you type in the numbers because you know what it should be.
Yes. And then once again, other accessories such as a coat hook. If you put a coat hook in the room, now, as an example, a sign cannot be mounted to a door, but you can put a coat hook on the back of a door and still be within compliance. And remember that coat hook is at 48 inches, not the length of the purse or the sweater or the coat that's going to be hanging on it to let you raise it. In this example, also, you can see I placed the paper towel dispenser and the paper towel trash next to the door as opposed to over here in the clear floor space of the sink. Two reasons. You'll see I got it outside of the door, and with everything COVID, this location actually has proven that I can now, after I wash my hands, grab the door handle, toss the trash without trying to, do my best Michael Jordan and, rim shot it off the back corner or something to throw the paper towel away. So it actually, in hindsight, this location is outside of all the clear floor spaces because this is projecting greater than the 4 inches. So and it's below the 27, as you can see kind of in this side view. So you have to be outside of clear floor spaces when working with that paper towel dispenser. An alternative, you could have it behind the door over here, and just make sure you pull your door away not to bang up your paper towel. Or another one.
Yeah, sorry, yes. You mentioned COVID, and that towel dispenser and trash location being better because people like to use a paper towel to pull the door open. But have there been any other changes or additions? I'm thinking, are people suddenly starting to introduce hand sanitizer dispensers or something like that? And nothing, I guess there's nothing to code yet.
There isn't. And that's not even a code requirement to put it next to the door there. That's a personal design preference to keep it out of those clear floor spaces. Hand sanitizers, once again, if you're not projecting more than your 4 inches and you're not reaching over anything, you could place a hand sanitizer right here in that 18 inches of the door. So right before you leave or you have just opened the door, you can use the hand sanitizer. And because you're not reaching over anything, you can mount that, the operable part, as high as 48. And once again, any of these devices that are automatic, as long as the sensor of it can be activated at that 48-inch height max, you can mount those automatic devices a little higher than the minimum 48. Best rule of thumb is start at 48. That's pretty comfortable now that we've been doing this for 30 years. But there are now options and exceptions to that. A lot of references, a lot of resources, and I told you I was going to try and keep it to the 55 minutes, and I know I talked pretty fast, but I found it's the only way to get through this. But access-board.gov, that's where you'll find accessibility. iccsafe.org, that's where you can find the code. Once again, the California Title 24, they have their own website, and then TDLR, who oversees the RAS program in Texas. They have a website, and you can also get those standards. And of course, in their CSINext, which you can always reach out to myself or Kathy. Mm-hmm. And if you want to send me questions, there's my email right there.
Yeah, and this has been fabulous, Daniel. Thank you very much. It's always something that no matter how much you do it, you always can use a reminder, because it always seems to be you get it just about balanced, and then there's one thing that screws it all up. This has been fabulous. We are going to take a summer break for our CSINext webinars, unless of course something absolutely fabulous falls in my lap, in which case I'll give you guys a bonus webinar. But I'll give you plenty of email notice for that. So keep your eye out. Everybody have a lovely summer, and we'll see you in September for the next webinar, which will be something very exciting. I'm not sure what, but it'll be exciting. I will make sure it's exciting. So thank you guys very much, and I'll talk to y'all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Many thank you, Daniel. Many, many, many thanks. And lots of thanks in the chat for you. So awesome. Goodbye, everybody.